Welcome to Hope on Fire, relevant talk radio for young adults. Whether you're 25 or 45, there's bound to be a discussion that you care about. Our mission is to share practical ways to find God in your everyday life. And now today's host, Chris Lang.
Did you know there was such a thing called the end of the world clock? Set up in 1947, this doomsday clock is meant to convey how close we are to the end of the world by catastrophe caused by nuclear weapons or climate change or other factors. Recently, for the first time in over 60 years, experts moved the time on the clock back 1 minute from 5 minutes to 6 minutes before midnight. It's the first time that scientists expressed optimism for humanity's future. But according to the Bible's teachings, the state of the world shortly before the coming of Jesus will rapidly deteriorate, even while many people proclaim improvement, peace, and safety. Hi, I'm Chris Lang, and today's program is part one of a two-part series called Awake and Ready. My guest is Barry Bussey. Barry is the Associate Director of the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Department of the Seventh-day Adventist World Church and also serves as the church's liaison to the U.S. Congress. In this first part, we'll review current world events, and in the second episode, we'll discuss motivations for staying alert. Welcome to our program, Barry. Welcome. It's great to have you today.
Well, it's great to be here, Chris.
Barry, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
You did a great job. Excellent.
I mean, I wasn't sure if being Canadian that maybe, there was a French or some other kind of pronunciation I was missing.
Yeah, no, that's excellent.
How is it being Canadian, having joined the World Church in Washington, D.C., and actually interacting with the U.S. Congress?
Well, it's very interesting. It's been a steep learning curve, as you can imagine. Of course, in Canada, we have a very different type of legislative system. Well, different in many respects, but a parliamentary system where the Prime Minister is, while he's not the head of state, he certainly has the power. And so whatever he says, or she says, it goes. And here in Washington, I'm very much intrigued by the diffuseness of power. So when the president says he wants something to pass, it's no guarantee. In fact, it seems like everyone, or at least an awful lot of the legislature, wants to do everything but pass what he wants. Whereas in Canada, in most cases, the Prime Minister would have the power to be able to ensure that the legislature passes whatever he desires. So that's kind of interesting. Because of this system, it tends, there's a lot of trying to get in contact with a multitude of people, as opposed to in Canada. Sometimes if you can get the ear of one or two key influential people to the Prime Minister, then you pretty much have gone a long ways down the road. Very different here in the U.S.
Barry, you recently wrote an article called "Discerning the Times," and by the way, we'll provide that article link on our website at hopeonfire.org for those of you listening today who would like to come and read Barry's article. Very interesting. Not an alarming approach, but certainly convincing, the different points that you bring out. Before we get into the article, I'm interested if you could provide our young adults with a brief historical context. The Christian church has been looking for signs for Jesus to come for a long time now. What makes our current events different in your mind from ages past? We've had world wars, we've had all kinds of things. What makes this era different?
Well, it's interesting. Throughout, as you mentioned, throughout the history of Christianity, we've always had this almost like an apocalyptic sense where, as Christians, we're always looking forward to Christ's return, and we know, based on Scripture and so forth, that there's going to be horrible times that will happen just before He returns. And like, if you don't mind, just in Romans chapter 13, the Apostle Paul says, "And do this, knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep, For now our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. The night is far spent. The day is at hand. And what I find intriguing about that is, of course, I mean, a lot of years have passed, and yet we still have this, I guess, a sense about us that, you know what, the Lord has to be coming soon. So what makes it any different? Well, the thing is this, Chris, the way I look at it is that it could be different for you and I today. I mean, heaven forbid, but if something should happen after this interview, next thing you know, I'm involved in some kind of an untoward accident or something, and I'm no longer on this earth.
Right.
So, there's that element that I think is important for us to keep in mind. However, just like the Apostle Paul says, our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. But as we look back on the history of Earth, when in all of the history of mankind have we ever had the capacity that we have today to actually end human life, period, based just simply on nuclear weaponry?
Mm-hmm.
So we are definitely at a very, very different time than anything we've ever experienced as mankind on the planet.
I think for context of our viewers today, what I've done is I've sorted some of the points you make in your article in priority based upon a survey, and in part two we'll talk more about the survey that we did on Facebook. For those of you again watching and listening today, go to our website, hopeonfire.org, and you can join our Facebook page, a fan page on Facebook, to follow our surveys that we do. And we asked our young adult viewers to give us their feedback on some of the areas they're most concerned about that are going on in the world today. The first one I'd like to have you talk about is church and state. This is an area that a lot of Christians, especially Seventh-day Adventist Christians, watch very carefully as we look at what's happening. Really, two thoughts come to mind. One is Jesus was very apolitical. What are your thoughts on how active Christians should be in politics? And then secondly, the issue of church and state. Where do you see the trend going?
Okay. Well, the thing I always point out to people is that Christianity is political. In other words, my Christian faith has a political dimension to it. Just because religious belief and my actions on my belief have political ramifications. And I can give any number of examples with respect to that. But, I mean, let's take one of the most hot button issues, and we'll talk about it later. But, I mean, if you look at the issue of marriage, for instance, just my belief and understanding with respect to marriage, something that I teach my children, has a very strong political impact.
Right.
Just on that issue. My religious belief about what I think about the death penalty or what I think about abortion and so forth, and my expressing of my religious beliefs on those issues, they have a political impact. So I think it's important for Christians, in my view, to continue to live their faith. And whatever political impact it has, well, it has. I mean, throughout the history of man, certainly throughout the modern history, which I would take from the Reformation onwards, the Protestant Reformation, you had individuals who were willing, simply because of their faith, to live and suffer the political consequences. So that's on one side.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side is individuals who seek to control government or control power and so forth, and using religion and using their religious beliefs and imposing that upon others and so forth. That's where you got another dimension there that becomes very problematic. It's often in the Protestant thinkers, for example, thought of two different tables of the Ten Commandments as an example. You see it in the writings of Roger Williams and so forth out of Rhode Island. A person who says, well, okay, as far as your relationship between you and God, that's between you and God, and the state should have no involvement. And Williams pointed out the first 4 commandments. So that included your Sabbath, included, not taking the name of the Lord thy God in vain, and so forth. And then the other tablet of commandments from the 5th onwards, honor your father and mother, thou shalt not kill, commit adultery, and so forth. All of that would be something that the state would be involved in. When we get individuals who are trying to use religion, or I should say use politics to force their religion on others, that becomes a real concern. So, for example, Sunday legislation, those kinds of things, where, okay, because I want to worship on Sunday, I think everybody else should worship on Sunday, or, that kind of thing. Then you have a third dimension, and the third dimension is where individuals, and you see this quite often, politicians will use religion or religious communities, churches, and so forth, as a beginning basis or as a framework to be involved politically, and try to then use the churches as a conduit, as it were, in order to gain power. And so anyhow, so those are the kinds of things that I see as part of the dynamic.
Okay, right before the break, would you tell us what do you think the impact will be, if any, of the Sunday law legislation that just recently got passed in Germany, just in 1 minute?
Well, I can tell you that this has been part of the basic law in Germany since about 1919. It's part of their constitution. It's something that it's written right into Constitution that it'll be a day of spiritual elevation. Personally, I don't see it as having a major impact on the rest of Western world. However, all it does is it does show, though, that when you enshrine something in a constitution, like they've done, obviously it's going to have an impact on their society.
Well, when we come back from the break, we want to talk about the trends in society and the world economy, and we'll cover as much as we can. We hope that you all will stay with us. You're listening to Hope on Fire, relevant talk radio for young adults. Welcome back. I'm Chris Lang, your host on Hope on Fire, relevant talk radio for young adults. I'm here in the studio with my new friend, Barry Bussey, who is the liaison to the U.S. Congress and also Associate Director at the World Church of the Seventh-day Adventist Christian Church up in Washington, D.C. area. Welcome back, Barry.
Great to be here again, Chris.
You have so many letters behind your name, I don't know how to fit it all in. No. It's really a privilege to talk with you today. Before the break, we were talking about church and state and the new Sunday laws that had just been passed in Germany. There's so much more we could talk about on the church and state issue, but we want to jump into some of the other trends that we're seeing. The next one up from our survey results was the shifting in society. I was thinking about the scripture, and twice mentioned in the book of Proverbs by the wisest man who ever lived. Solomon says there is a way that seems right to a man, but the way thereof is the way of death. There's two important trends that you talk about in our postmodern culture: relativism and the gay marriage issue. Talk about their similarities and differences, and why Seventh-day Adventist Christians and other Christians, quite frankly, should be watching this, and what they can do to be to dealing with it in a proactive way.
Well, Chris, one of the things that's going on in our society is that there's a serious change with respect to attitudes on things. the reality is that we are faced with a culture that's very hostile to us just simply living our lives. Just simply living your life, as I mentioned earlier, has a political consequence. And it is becoming to the point where a lot of people are not interested in allowing people to just be themselves as far as their own religious views and opinions and walk. There's a view out there that says that Christianity, that religion should be kept, within the four walls of the church. And when you leave church on your Sabbath and you go outside into the world, you shouldn't be taking your views with you. And so what happens is there's kind of like a melting pot of ideas of sorts going on. In other words, I think right now our society is recalibrating. It's trying to figure out what will be acceptable and what won't be acceptable. And one of the things that is becoming very dominant in the thinking is that there's no such thing as anything being not acceptable. Now, obviously, just based on, our natural need to survive, there has to be some limits. And so we're kind of like floundering right now, trying to figure out what's what. And
Barry, I wanted to just interrupt for a second and add to what you're saying. Is I was reading a book for continuing education recently called Wheel, Deal, and Steal. And it's a book written by a secular author. He's not writing from a Judeo-Christian tradition standpoint. And he makes a point in this book that's very profound that I think lends weight to what you're talking about. And he says that in the problem in our culture today is that in the past there was a pre-agreed upon rule of the road or rules of the game, and the idea that truth is relative has caused basically the government to have to start legislating every little thing. Because the Bible and this secular writer says the Bible used to be the standard upon which the rules of the game were played. But nobody will agree anymore on what the rules are in terms of morality. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. You see, it's kind of like this. Of course, a lot of people who talk about, gay marriage and so forth will mention, Romans 1 and 2 and all the rest of that. But it's like we're at a point now where people find religion restrictive. Mm-hmm. And so they want to just go ahead and do their own thing. So now what's happening, I think, is that as a society, we're now going to have to relearn why it was that those generations before us had those rules, why this ancient document, this manuscript we call the Bible, that has been passed on to us, why it had the prohibitions that it did have. It's kind of like we're trying to, like I say, recalibrate, trying to figure out why did we have all of these ideas and rules and ways of doing things. And I think ultimately that we're going to be just the same as we get a huge boom and bust in the stock market, we're going to get a boom and bust in the morality market as well.
Let's talk about that. That was a great segue, Barry, to our next thought, which is the concerns of the world economy. A lot of people listening today may not be aware, especially in the United States, how dependent the U.S. economy is on foreign support to sort of prop up our economy right now. And
let me just say that one of the reasons why this is so important as far as a religious freedom issue is that we have seen examples in the past. Germany is probably the one that kind of hits us right in the face, where really bad economy created some real bad problems with respect to religious freedom, with respect to all kinds of freedom. And, when people's backs are up against the wall, when people are frustrated because they're unemployed and so forth, they will seek out a savior who's going to come and try to solve all the problems. And obviously, if it's a beneficent savior, then that's fine. But more often than not, it's just somebody who's attracted to power. And we saw that with the struggles of fascism and so forth in Europe. Well, the same. So as a result, we get this real big concern that the current economic trouble that we're finding ourselves. And you mentioned about the U.S. Officially, the U.S. government is in debt somewhere around 12, 13, maybe 15 trillion. But officially, it's in that range, 12 to 15 trillion.
Give or take a trillion.
Yeah, a trillion. Well, now, just think about that for a minute.
Well,
at the time of Ronald Reagan was when the U.S. government first crossed $1 trillion debt.
Man.
I mean, this time last year, within 30 days, the stimulus package almost created another trillion. So, I mean, that was in 30 days. So it took us from the time of the 1776 revolution to 1980s to get $1 trillion in debt, and we did it in 30 days.
30 days.
Is crazy.
Wow.
Anyhow, the overall U.S. debt, taking in its responsibilities for, Social Security and so forth, some reports I've read have said that it could be as high as $60 trillion. Now, that's a lot of cash. The thing is, if China and these other countries do not buy our treasuries, we just simply do not continue as an economy.
We're basically a bankrupt nation, are we not?
I mean, we're just drinking and hoping that all of our pain goes away.
I want to read something, Barry, from the Word. This is from Luke 21 and verse 25. This is fascinating. This is one of the only, maybe the only place where this word is used, maybe one of two places in the Greek New Testament. There will be signs in the sun, in the moon, and in the stars, and on the earth, distress of nations with perplexity. I'm not going to read the rest of the verse, but that's the key word, with perplexity. The Greek actually has a financial connotation, Barry. It's an end of the world connotation. That it's the only place where you can find that word that basically means to be without resources, to be left wanting, and to be embarrassed.
Yep.
Are we an embarrassed country right now?
I mean, we are a struggling country right now, and it's really sad. I look at being on Capitol Hill, for example. You look at in many ways, Capitol Hill it's almost like it's under siege. Every so many blocks, you see so many police officers, cars waiting, police officers in their cars and their dog canine units and all the rest of it. And it's like, how is it's come to this? I mean, it doesn't take very long. Today, for instance, I was on the metro and, there was a smoke and so on. And everyone, of course, the first thing that everybody thinks about, we hope that no terrorist or something is going to be involved in.
Yeah.
And you just, it's like everybody's on these pins and needles. And we say, the state that we find ourselves in ultimately, at the end of the day, it's only as we have that a close walk with the Lord where
Amen.
We are having a personal relationship with Him that we can say, hey, no matter what the perplexity is, we can rest assured that we can find that inner peace and live in that inner peace amidst all the turmoil.
Talk about briefly, we only have 2 minutes left, actually 1 minute. You made a comment about the army surrounding Jerusalem, but Titus is returning. Who is Titus, and what is Titus is returning in the context of discerning the times?
Well, Christ gave a prophecy that said that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, and that when the armies surround Jerusalem, that God's people, those who were following Christ, would say, "Okay, let's leave. Now is the time. This is the sign that Christ said, let's go." It was interesting. A friend of mine was mentioning to me about this whole current financial crisis and so forth, and he says, really, currently right now, there's been kind of a reprieve through government actions, the stimulus package and so forth. It's kind of put off the day of reckoning, as it were. And so it's just kind of like at the time of in Jerusalem, where the armies kind of relaxed because what ended up happening. They retreated. Mm-hmm. And then Titus, who was, the Roman general that eventually then came subsequently and destroyed the city. So it's the idea that this friend, as he was explaining it to me, was saying, well, the reality is the government money is going to run out. And we don't know what's going to happen to the economy when it does. And so right now there's a reprieve. Get your financial house in order because Titus is coming. It was his words.
Barry, thank you so much for your time today. And we'll look forward to connecting next time. We hope you all will join us for part 2 of Awake and Ready. Take a look at our website to share our programs free with your friends and family. Join us again. God bless you.
Hope on Fire is produced by Livestreams Media, a listener-supported ministry. To download a free copy of today's program or be a part of our social network, please visit our website at hopeonfire.org. You may also contact us by writing to Livestreams Media, P.O. Box 608513, Orlando, Florida 32860, or online at hopeonfire.org. Thank you so much for your letters and continued support. Until next time, may God set your hope on fire.